Welcome to Crossdressing Stories. Here, we share personal stories, celebrate self-expression. If you're on your own journey or simply curious, you've found your community. Subscribe and join the conversation.
A year had passed since our documentary, The Northwood Truth, went live, and the echoes of our strange, painful revolution had softened into a quiet hum of acceptance. The fire we had started didn't rage into a media wildfire like director Iris's version had threatened to. Instead, it became a slow, steady, and warm burn in the quieter corners of the internet. It became an online phenomenon, not for its sensationalism, but for its painfully honest authenticity. Our raw, unedited story, filmed on our phones, had resonated in a way no slickly produced film ever could. Northwood High was no longer a national punchline. It had become a case study, a complicated and messy lesson discussed by educators, sociologists, and psychologists across the country. Life had settled into a startling, beautiful state of peace. Maya and I, now seniors navigating the final months of our high school lives, co-chaired the student council. Our meetings were no longer about dousing ideological fires or brokering truces between warring factions. Instead, we organized talks on mental health, set up peer mediation groups, and fostered a space where differences were met with curiosity, not hostility. The quiet revolution continued, not through grand gestures, but through small, daily acts of understanding. Occasionally, on a lazy Friday, I still chose to wear the pleated navy skirt. It wasn't a statement anymore, not a gauntlet thrown down. It was just an option in my closet, as familiar as a favorite pair of jeans. It was simply a part of me, a quiet reminder of the boy I had been and the man I was becoming. Everything was good. Everything was calm. Which is, of course, the precise moment the world decides to knock. The knock came in the form of a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the embossed seal of the prestigious Northwood University. It landed on Principal Croft's desk on a Tuesday morning, and she called the four of us into her office. Me, Maya, Josh, and Finn. The original architects of the counternarrative. Northwood, a private liberal arts university renowned for its social science programs and its commitment to community activism, was making an unprecedented offer. They were establishing a brand new, custom-designed scholarship program. The letterhead read, the Northwood Legacy Scholarship. It wasn't designed for the valedictorian or the star athlete. The criteria were unlike any we had ever seen. It was for a cohort of students who had demonstrated outstanding leadership through empathy, resilience, and courage in the face of profound social adversity. The final paragraph was a formal invitation. They wanted the core group of the Northwood Project to visit their campus in 2 weeks to present our journey to the scholarship committee. It was the final, most decisive step in their selection process. It wasn't just a scholarship for one of us, it was for the group. A full ride. For all four of us. Holding the heavy, expensive paper in my hand, I felt a jolt of electricity run down my spine, a dizzying mix of disbelief and elation. This was it. The door to the future, a future I hadn't even dared to dream of, was swinging wide open. But as I looked at the fierce, determined joy in Maya's eyes, the pure, unadulterated elation on Josh's face, and even the flicker of grudging interest in Finn's, a familiar, cold feeling began to creep into the pit of my stomach. The shadow of Sam the legend, the boy who gave the speech, the accidental hero, a persona I thought I had finally shed, was stretching out long before me once again. The world wanted a story, and I was afraid I had forgotten how to tell it. The news of the Northwood Scholarship spread through our small group like wildfire, and with it came an immediate, unspoken pressure. This wasn't just about getting into college anymore, it was about validating our entire experience. It felt like the final exam for a class we never signed up for. The weight of it settled on my shoulders, heavy and suffocating. The legend of Sam, the accidental hero of Northwood, had always felt like an ill-fitting suit, and now I was being asked to wear it on the most important stage of my life. My old anxieties, the ones I thought I had conquered, came creeping back. The memory of standing on that auditorium stage, my voice shaking as I faced down a room of angry parents, was a source of pride, but also a source of deep-seated terror. I had done it once, fueled by pure adrenaline and righteous anger. But could I do it again? Could I perform it on command under the sterile academic gaze of a scholarship committee? The thought made my palms sweat. The feeling solidified into a familiar, paralyzing condition, imposter syndrome. While Maya saw a hero, I saw the boy who used to hide in the back of the class. While Josh saw a leader, I saw the kid who was too scared to talk to his crush. The narrative that had been built around me felt like a fiction I was no longer talented enough to maintain. Who was I to represent this legacy? I hadn't been a brave revolutionary. I had been a terrified kid trying to survive. The bravery was an accident. This fear began to manifest in my actions, or rather, my inaction. While Maya immediately created a shared document, a meticulously organized outline for our presentation, I found myself staring at the blank screen, my mind a hollow void. When she called meetings, I'd show up late with a flimsy excuse. When she asked for my input on the opening statement, I'd mumble something non-committal like, "It sounds good," or "whatever you think is best." One evening, Maya cornered me in the library, her expression a mixture of frustration and concern. "Sam, what's going on with you? We need you on this. You're the heart of the story." "I don't know, Maya," I said, avoiding her gaze by pretending to be intensely interested in the spine of a history textbook. "I'm just busy. A lot of homework." It was a weak lie, and we both knew it. The truth was, I was terrified. Terrified that when I opened my mouth in front of that committee, nothing would come out. Or worse, that the words that did come out would be hollow and uninspired, revealing me for the fraud I felt I was. I was the boy who found his voice when he was forced to wear a skirt, and I was deathly afraid that, in my comfortable jeans and hoodie, I had lost it again. The more I tried to grasp for the words, the more they slipped through my fingers, leaving me with nothing but the crushing weight of expectation. While I was receding into a shell of anxiety, Maya was expanding to fill the void. For her, the Crestwood Scholarship wasn't just an opportunity, it was vindication. It was the world finally acknowledging that the pain, the conflict, and the chaos had all meant something. It was a golden ticket that would justify every tear she'd shed, every moment of fear she'd endured while wearing that drab, gray uniform. She wasn't just aiming to win the scholarship, she was aiming to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we were worthy of it. This fierce determination manifested as a relentless, focused drive. Her laptop became her command center. She spent hours in the library, poring over Crestwood's mission statement, researching the professors on the scholarship committee, and cross-referencing their academic papers. The shared document she created wasn't just an outline, it was a doctoral thesis on our own lives. It had color-coded sections, footnotes, and a minute-by-minute schedule for the 30-minute presentation. Her pursuit of perfection became all-consuming. She saw the presentation as a delicate, intricate machine, and she was the only one who knew how to operate it. When Josh tried to add a personal anecdote about how the experience changed the basketball team's locker room dynamic, she gently dismissed it. "It's a good story, Josh," she'd say, her fingers never stopping their rapid-fire typing, "but it doesn't quite fit the thematic through line I'm building here. Let's stick to the script." When Finn suggested opening with a raw, spoken-word poem about conformity, Maya's smile was tight. "That's very you, Finn. But the committee will be expecting a more structured, academic approach. We need to show them we're serious scholars, not just angry kids." She was so focused on crafting the perfect narrative that she began to sand down the rough, authentic edges that had made our story so powerful in the first place. My silence and withdrawal only fueled her need for control. Since I wasn't contributing, she felt she had to do my part too. She wrote my speaking sections for me, carefully curating a version of my experience that was eloquent, heroic, and completely devoid of the stammering terror I actually felt. One afternoon, I tried to offer a small suggestion. "Maybe," I said hesitantly, "we should talk more about how scared everyone was? Not just the anger, but the fear." Maya looked up from her screen, her eyes tired but intense. "I've covered the emotional impact in Section 3, Subpoint B," she said, pointing at the monitor. "It's more effective to frame it as adversity-driven growth rather than just fear. It sounds stronger." She wasn't being malicious. In her mind, she was protecting us. She was polishing our story until it shone, convinced that any sign of weakness, any hint of imperfection, would be the thing that cost us everything. But in doing so, she was unintentionally recreating the very dynamic she had once fought against. She was becoming General Maya again, the leader of the Greys, convinced that her way was the only way to survive. And the rest of us, once her trusted allies, were slowly being demoted to soldiers expected to follow her orders without question. While Maya was building her fortress of perfection, and I was digging a trench of self-doubt, Josh was living in two different worlds. In one world, he was a key part of the Northwood legacy, a student activist with a story to tell. In the other, he was simply Josh the Jock, captain of the Northwood Wildcats, living and breathing basketball in the most important season of his life. For a long time, those two worlds had existed in a surprisingly easy harmony. The skirt had, bizarrely, improved his game, and the leadership skills he learned in our student council had made him a better, more empathetic captain. But the Crestwood opportunity forced his two worlds into a head-on collision. The pressure was mounting. The state semifinals were scheduled for the night before our presentation at Crestwood. It was the biggest game of his high school career, a culmination of years of early morning practices and grueling drills. More importantly, a top scout from a Division I university, a school with a legendary basketball program that had been Josh's dream since he was a kid, had confirmed he would be in the stands. It was the one shot he'd been working for his entire life. This created a deep, internal conflict that he struggled to articulate. During our prep meetings, his mind was clearly elsewhere. While Maya discussed thematic through lines, Josh would be subtly sketching plays in the margins of his notebook. When we rehearsed, his delivery of the lines Maya had written for him felt flat, his heart clearly not in it. He felt a growing resentment that he couldn't quite place. He was being asked to spend his evenings perfecting a speech about his past when all he wanted to do was practice free throws to secure his future. "I just don't get why it has to be now," he confessed to me one afternoon in the weight room, the clang of metal punctuating his frustration. "Crestwood is amazing, man. For all of us. But this is the scout. I only get one chance to make that impression." I could see the war playing out in his eyes. He felt a deep loyalty to us, to the journey we had shared. The thought of letting us down was unbearable. The uniform had changed him, opened his eyes to a world beyond the court, and he valued that. He valued us. But basketball was his passion, the core of his identity long before any of this had happened. Was he supposed to just set that dream aside? The conflict came to a head when Maya scheduled a mandatory, all-day final prep session for the Saturday of the semifinals. "I can't, Maya," Josh said, his voice strained. "The game is that night. I need to be focused. I need to rest, do my pre-game routine." Maya's expression hardened with disappointment. "Josh, this presentation is for a full scholarship for 4 years. For all of us. It's bigger than one game." "It's not just one game to me," he shot back, his voice rising. "It might be my entire future. Just like this scholarship might be yours." It was the first time any of us had framed our futures as separate possibilities. The unspoken assumption had always been that we would rise or fall together. But now Josh was being forced to choose. He was standing at a crossroads, one path leading to a future defined by his athletic talent, the other to a future defined by his newfound social consciousness. He looked at Maya, then at me, a desperate plea in his eyes, silently asking a question none of us knew how to answer. Could he really be both? If Josh felt torn between two worlds, Finn felt like he was on a different planet altogether. He had been a willing soldier in the uniform wars, but his reasons were his own. He hadn't fought for empathy or understanding in the academic sense. He had fought because he possessed a deep, instinctual hatred for bullies and unjust authority. The skirts, the overalls, it was all just another form of the man trying to crush individual spirit, and his punk rock ethos demanded that he fight back. The alliance he formed with us was one of convenience, a case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, that same fight was being sanitized, packaged, and prepared for academic consumption, and it made his skin crawl. To him, Our presentation wasn't a testament to our struggle. It was a performance piece designed to win favor with a new type of authority, the University Admissions Board. The raw anger, the chaos, the genuine fear, it was all being polished into a neat, tidy narrative of adversity-driven growth, a term he openly mocked. "It's a sellout," he declared during one of our tense meetings, leaning back in his chair with a defiant slouch, his combat boots propped up on the library table. "We're taking something that was real and turning it into a corporate PowerPoint presentation. We fought to be ourselves, and now we're trying to be the exact type of cookie-cutter scholarship kids they want us to be." His target was almost always Maya. He saw her meticulous planning not as diligence, but as conformity. He viewed her carefully chosen academic language as a betrayal of the raw emotion that had fueled their rebellion. Every time she'd try to steer the conversation toward the committee's expectations, he would deliberately derail it. "Maya, do you really think they want to hear about reciprocal empathy?" he'd sneer. "They want to hear about what it felt like to have Mark Henderson's Neanderthal buddies try to trip you in the hallway. They want the grit, not the glossary. They want to see that we can think critically about what happened." "Finn," Maya would retort, her patience wearing paper thin. "They want to know we learned something, not just that we got angry." Finn's role in the group quickly became that of the cynical saboteur. He saw it as his duty to preserve the authenticity of their story, even if it meant torpedoing the entire opportunity. He would show up to meetings with new, inflammatory lines for his section of the speech, describing the faculty as wardens and the school as a social prison. They were powerful, poetic lines, but they were also completely inappropriate for a scholarship presentation. His defiance wasn't just for show. Underneath the punk rock armor and the cynical barbs, Finn was wrestling with his own future. He was a talented artist and poet, but he had never considered a place like Crestwood to be for someone like him. He felt like an outsider, a token, edgy kid they had included in the group. He believed, deep down, that he didn't belong in their world of academic prestige. And so, he did what he always did when he felt threatened or out of place. He tried to burn it all down before it could reject him first. He was fighting to protect the integrity of the past because he was terrified he had no place in the future we were all fighting for. While the four of us wrestled with the future, Mark Henderson was trapped in the past. The year since his public humiliation at the town hall meeting had been a quiet, personal purgatory. He had done what everyone wanted. He had faded away. The swaggering wolf was gone, replaced by a ghost who haunted the hallways of Northwood High. He kept his head down, spoke only when spoken to, and ate his lunch alone in a corner of the cafeteria that no one ever bothered with. He had ceased to be a villain, but he hadn't become anything else. He was simply nothing. The guilt was a physical weight on him. It wasn't just about the town hall. It was a year's worth of casual cruelty he was now forced to replay in his mind. Every taunt he'd thrown at me and Josh, every sneer he'd directed at the girls in their overalls, it all came back to him in the dead of night. He saw the flicker of fear in a freshman's eyes, the forced nonchalance of a boy trying to pretend a shove didn't hurt. He had been the monster in so many people's stories, and he didn't know how to live with that knowledge. His father, after his own political implosion, had withdrawn completely, treating Mark with a cold, disappointed silence that was worse than any lecture. The approval he had once so desperately craved was gone, leaving a hollow ache. He was adrift, without an anchor. From this lonely vantage point, Mark became an unwilling observer of our group's journey. He saw us studying in the library, heard the whispers about the Crestwood scholarship. And he felt a profound, aching envy. It wasn't envy for the opportunity itself, but for the camaraderie. He watched us, even in our arguments and frustrations, and saw a bond, a shared purpose. We had a we. He only had me. He desperately wanted to apologize, to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm he had created. He'd practice speeches in his head, simple words like, "I'm sorry," but they would die on his lips whenever he got close to any of us. How could he? What right did he have to intrude on our success after he had been the primary architect of our misery? He felt that any attempt to connect would be seen as a selfish, manipulative ploy to ride our coattails to redemption. So he remained silent, locked in his solitary confinement. He would see me walking down the hall and feel a pang of shame so intense, he'd have to duck into the nearest empty classroom until it passed. He would hear Maya's determined voice during a student council meeting and remember the ugly things he'd shouted about her. He believed he didn't deserve a bright future, that his penance was to watch the people he had tormented build theirs. The legacy of his own actions was a life sentence of loneliness, and he couldn't see any possibility of parole. The inevitable implosion happened on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before the presentation. Maya had called what she termed a final dress rehearsal in the empty auditorium. The air was already thick with a toxic brew of resentment and anxiety before we even began. Josh was fidgeting, his mind clearly on his upcoming game. Finn was slumped in a front-row seat, radiating pure disdain. I felt a familiar lump of dread forming in my throat. "Okay, everyone," Maya began, clapping her hands together with a forced, brittle cheerfulness. "Let's run it from the top. Sam, you're on." All eyes turned to me. I walked onto the stage, the single spotlight feeling as hot and accusatory as a police interrogation lamp. I opened my mouth to recite the heroic, eloquent opening statement Maya had written for me. The words were on the page, I had read them a dozen times, but my brain refused to connect to my mouth. The legacy of Northwood is one of, I stammered, my voice a weak croak. The carefully constructed sentences dissolved into a puddle of ums and ahs. My mind was a blank, white wall of panic. "Sam, the line is the legacy of Northwood is a testament to the transformative power of institutional empathy," Maya corrected from the darkness, her voice sharp with impatience. Her correction, meant to help, only made it worse. The wall of panic in my head now had her words scrawled on it in giant, mocking letters. Right, testament, power. I tried again, but it was useless. I just stood there, mute and mortified. "For crying out loud," Finn muttered from his seat, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He sounds like a malfunctioning robot. Just let him say what he wants to say, Maya." "What he wants to say isn't going to win us a scholarship, Finn." Maya snapped back, her composure finally cracking. "We need to be polished. We need to be perfect." "This isn't perfect, this is plastic." Finn shot up from his seat. "This whole thing is a joke. You're turning our story into something you'd see in a boring corporate training video. At least I'm trying." Maya's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and hurt, which is more than I can say for anyone else. "I am carrying this entire thing on my back while you," she pointed a shaking finger at Finn, "are trying to blow it up, and you," she turned to Josh, "are off in La La Land dreaming about basketballs, and you," her gaze finally landed on me, full of bitter disappointment, "have apparently forgotten how to speak English." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. The dress rehearsal was over. The disaster had begun. Maya's words hung in the air, sharp and glittering with unshed tears. The dam of her carefully constructed control had burst, and a flood of frustration poured out. "Do you have any idea how much pressure this is?" she continued, her voice rising with every word. "Everything has to be perfect. One wrong word, one awkward pause, and they'll think we're just a fluke. They'll think we're not Crestwood material. I am trying to build a future for all of us, and none of you seem to care. That's not fair." Josh finally exploded, stepping forward from the wings of the stage. He had been quiet until now, but Maya's jab about basketball had clearly hit a nerve. "Of course I care. But this isn't the only thing in my future. This game on Saturday, it's a real shot for me. A different kind of shot. Does that make my dream less important than yours? You don't get to decide that for me, Maya." "It's not about what's more important," Maya countered, her voice shaking. "It's about commitment. We are supposed to be a team." "This isn't a team, it's a dictatorship," Finn yelled from the floor. He stormed towards the stage, his face flushed with anger. "It stopped being about us the moment you wrote a script and told us to read it. You don't want our stories, you want your version of them. You're no better than that director, Iris. You're just trying to sell something." The comparison to Iris was a low blow, and it landed with devastating accuracy. Maya visibly flinched as if she'd been struck. "How dare you," she whispered, her voice cracking completely. "I did all of this, for us." I stood frozen on the stage, caught in the crossfire, the weight of my own failure pressing down on me. They were all right. Maya was trying too hard. Finn was being cynical. Josh was divided. And I was a void. A silent, useless coward. The guilt finally broke my paralysis. "She's right," I said, my voice barely audible. The argument stopped as they all turned to look at me. "She's right about me. I haven't been helping. I can't do this." With that confession hanging in the silent auditorium, I turned and walked off the stage. I didn't run. I just walked, down the steps and up the center aisle, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could feel their eyes on my back. "Sam, wait," I heard Maya call out, her voice small and broken. But I didn't wait. I couldn't. I pushed open the heavy auditorium doors and escaped into the empty hallway, leaving the wreckage of our group, our friendship, and our future behind me. The 4 pillars of the Northwood legacy, once a symbol of unity, had finally crumbled. The next day, a heavy, unspoken gloom hung over the school. We avoided each other in the hallways, the 4 of us orbiting in separate, miserable galaxies. The silence was louder than the argument had been. I spent most of the day hiding in the library, feeling like a complete failure. Late in the afternoon, a student I didn't know tapped me on the shoulder. "Principal Croft wants to see you," she said. My heart sank. I trudged to her office, expecting a lecture, a disappointed sigh, an official cancellation of our trip to Crestwood. I walked in and found her sitting not behind her imposing desk, but in one of the 2 comfortable chairs facing it. She gestured for me to take the other one. "I heard the rehearsal did not go well," she said calmly, her hands folded in her lap. "It wasn't a question." "You could say that," I mumbled, staring at my shoes. "It was a disaster." I froze. "I see," she said. She didn't offer pity or criticism. She just sat there with me in the quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "Sam, do you remember the town hall meeting? The night you stood up to all those angry parents?" "I try not to," I confessed. "It terrifies me." "I understand. But I want you to think about it," she insisted gently. "Think about that boy on the stage. He was terrified, too. His voice was shaking. He wasn't eloquent or polished. He was just honest. So, let me ask you, where did he find the strength to speak?" I thought back to that night. The blinding lights, the angry faces, the feeling of my own heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. What had made me walk up there? It wasn't a prepared speech. It was a raw, undeniable feeling. "I don't know," I said slowly. "I guess I just got angry. Angry that they were missing the point. That they were twisting everything. I just wanted to tell them the truth. My truth." Principal Croft nodded, a slow, understanding smile touching her lips. "Exactly. Your strength didn't come from a script, Sam. It never has. It comes from your honesty. From your vulnerability." She leaned forward slightly. "You are not an actor, and you don't need to be. The boy who stood on that stage wasn't a fraud. He was the most authentic person in the room. Perhaps," she added, her gaze thoughtful, "the scholarship committee doesn't need to see a hero. Perhaps they just need to see him." She let the words settle. She wasn't giving me a solution. She was giving me a mirror, showing me a reflection of myself I had forgotten existed. I walked out of her office not with a plan, but with a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks, a possibility. The possibility that my weakness, my fear, my stammering honesty, wasn't a liability. Maybe it was the only real strength I had. After I left her office, Principal Croft made another call. This time, it was Maya she summoned. Maya walked in defensively, expecting to be reprimanded for the group's implosion, ready to justify her actions and detail how everyone else had let her down. Like with me, Croft gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite. On the small table between them was a single, thick stack of paper, bound by a clip. It was Maya's presentation plan. "I've been reading your proposal for the Crestwood presentation," Croft began, her tone neutral and academic. "It's impressive. Thorough, well-researched, and strategically sound. You've anticipated potential questions, structured a compelling narrative arc. From a purely tactical standpoint, it's flawless." Maya relaxed slightly, a flicker of pride cutting through her defensiveness. "Thank you. I tried to cover all our bases. Indeed, Croft said, her eyes fixed on Maya's. But in all these pages, Maya, in all this flawless planning, you seem to have omitted the most important lesson from our entire social experiment. The one thing that you, more than anyone, taught this school. Maya frowned, confused. What's that? Principal Croft leaned forward and tapped the thick stack of paper with one finger. This, she said, is the work of one person. A very brilliant, very capable person. But it is not the work of a team. It is a monument to control. The word control hung in the air between them. The greatest change at Northwood didn't happen when I imposed a rule, Croft continued softly. It happened when you stood up to Mark Henderson without a script. It happened when Sam found his voice in front of a hostile crowd. It happened when the students on their own decided to tell their own story. The most powerful lesson wasn't about empathy mandated from above. It was about the trust that grew between all of you from the ground up. She looked from the meticulously planned document back to Maya's face. You've built a perfect, impenetrable fortress here, Maya. But you've built it alone. You've locked the gates, even to your own allies. A true leader doesn't drag her team behind her, securing every step. A true leader walks beside them and trusts that they will know how to walk for themselves, even if they stumble. Maya stared at the document, at the pages and pages of her own obsessive, fearful planning. She saw it for what it was, not a blueprint for success, but a cage she had built for all of them, born from her terror of failure. She had been so afraid of not being good enough that she hadn't trusted the very people who had proven, time and again, that they were. The realization dawned on her, painful and liberating all at once. Her greatest strength wasn't her intellect or her planning, it was the trust she inspired in others. And she had been the one to break it. While the foundations of our group were being quietly rebuilt in Principal Croft's office, Mark Henderson was about to face a test of his own. He was leaving school for the day when he saw Finn leaning against the brick wall of the gymnasium, alone. A car full of guys from a rival school, the Northwood team's opponent for the upcoming semifinals, pulled up nearby. They were loud, arrogant, and clearly looking for trouble. Well, look what we have here, the driver, a beefy guy in a Letterman jacket, called out. It's one of those Northwood freaks. Hey, where's your skirt, princess? Finn didn't rise to the bait. He just gave them a bored, dismissive look and turned to walk away. But they weren't finished. Two of them got out of the car, blocking his path. We're talking to you, the driver's friend said, shoving Finn's shoulder. Heard your whole school is a bunch of weirdos. What's it like, huh? All you guys playing dress up? Mark watched from a distance, hidden by the corner of the building. A cold, sick feeling churned in his stomach. The words, the tone, the casual, smug cruelty, it was like watching a ghost of himself. This was him a year ago. This was the exact kind of pointless, aggressive garbage he used to spew. He saw the flicker of anger mixed with something else, weariness, in Finn's eyes as he stood his ground. Every instinct in Mark's body screamed at him to stay hidden, to walk away, to not get involved. It wasn't his fight. Finn hated him. Getting involved would only make things worse. But then he remembered the town hall. He remembered the feeling of 100 pairs of eyes on him, the crushing weight of public shame. He remembered the loneliness that followed. And in that moment, he saw Finn not as the punk rock kid who always sneered at him, but as someone who was completely, utterly alone, surrounded by circling sharks. He couldn't watch it happen. Not again. Before he could second-guess himself, Mark stepped out from behind the building and walked toward the confrontation. His heart was hammering, but his steps were steady. The rival guys turned, surprised by the interruption. Who's this? Mark ignored them. He walked right up and stood shoulder to shoulder with Finn, facing them down. He didn't puff out his chest or put up his fists. He just stood there, a quiet, solid presence. He's with me, Mark said, his voice level and clear, devoid of the old arrogance. It was just a statement of fact. You have a problem with him, you have a problem with me. The guys from the other school were taken aback. They had been expecting a one-on-one confrontation they could easily win. A two-on-two fight was more complicated and not worth the trouble. The driver grumbled an insult, they shot a few dirty looks, and then piled back into their car and sped off. Silence descended. Finn stared at Mark, his usual cynical expression replaced by one of pure, unadulterated shock. He had been ready for a fight, ready to be on his own. He had not, in a million years, been ready for a rescue. Especially not from the one person he thought was his sworn enemy. You didn't have to do that, Finn said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Yeah, Mark said, finally looking at him, a flicker of his old awkwardness returning. I know. He didn't say anything else. He just gave a slight nod and walked away, leaving Finn standing there, reevaluating everything he thought he knew about Mark Henderson. It wasn't an apology in words, but it was something more powerful, an act of redemption. The night of the semifinals arrived, buzzing with tension and the squeak of sneakers on polished wood. The gym was packed, a roaring sea of school colors. Josh felt the familiar pregame adrenaline, but it was mixed with a heavy distraction. The fight with Maya, his fractured friendship with me and Finn, it all weighed on him. He tried to focus, to get into the zone, but his mind kept drifting back to the auditorium. The game was a brutal, neck-and-neck battle. Josh played with a desperate intensity, pouring all of his frustration and conflict into his performance. He was everywhere, sinking threes, making impossible layups, diving for loose balls. He was playing for his future, for the scout in the stands, for a dream he was terrified of losing. But late in the fourth quarter, with Northwood down by 2, something shifted. Their star center went down with a twisted ankle. The team's morale plummeted. During the timeout, Josh looked at the defeated faces of his teammates. He saw their exhaustion, their fear of losing. And in that moment, his focus shifted from his own performance to theirs. He pulled them into a tight huddle. Hey, look at me, he said, his voice cutting through their panic. Forget the scoreboard. Forget them. This is our court. We've been through worse than this. A lot worse. He looked each of them in the eye. We trust each other. We play for each other. That's how we win. Not just on the scoreboard, but right here, right now. Together. It was a speech born not from a coach's playbook, but from the lessons he'd learned in the student council, in the hallways, in the shared struggle of the past 2 years. It was the voice of a true captain. They went back onto the court, not as a collection of players, but as a single, unified team. They fought for every possession. In the final 10 seconds, they were still down by 1. Josh had the ball. The crowd was on its feet, a deafening roar. He saw an opening, a path to the basket. This was his hero moment, the game-winning shot the scout was waiting to see. But then he saw his teammate, a quiet sophomore who had been struggling all night, flash open in the corner, completely unguarded. In a split-second decision, Josh chose not to be the hero. He chose to be the leader. He fired a perfect pass to the sophomore. The ball went up, the buzzer sounded, and the shot rimmed out. They lost. The silence that followed was heavy with disappointment. As the other team celebrated, Josh walked over and put his arm around the devastated sophomore, who was fighting back tears. Hey, Josh said firmly. You were open. It was the right play. I'll make that pass again every single time. I'm proud of you. Later, as he was leaving the locker room, a man in a crisp suit approached him. It was the scout. Tough loss, son, the scout said. Yes, sir, Josh said, bracing himself for the better luck next time. You've got a hell of a jump shot, the scout continued, and your court vision is excellent. But any decent coach can teach that. He paused, his gaze serious. What I saw in that last timeout, and on that final play, that's character. That's leadership. You can't teach that. We need guys like you on our team. Josh stood there stunned. He had lost the game. He had given up the glory shot, but in doing so, he had shown the scout something far more valuable. He hadn't had to choose between being an athlete and being a leader. He had just discovered that, for him, they were one and the same. The 2 days leading up to the Crestwood trip were a whirlwind of collaborative energy. The library table became our sanctuary, littered with empty coffee cups, crumpled notes, and 5 distinct perspectives slowly weaving into one. The blank page Maya had put before us was filled, not with a rigid script, but with a constellation of ideas, phrases, and personal truths. We abandoned the idea of a polished, seamless narrative. Instead, we decided to embrace the mess. Our presentation would be a mosaic, each of us presenting a single, unvarnished piece of our own story. There would be no grand, overarching theme imposed from the top down. The theme, we hoped, would emerge from the raw, honest friction between our different experiences. Maya, liberated from her role as the master planner, became the master listener. She helped us find the core of our individual stories, asking questions that pushed us to be more honest. She helped me shape my rambling thoughts about fear into a coherent reflection on vulnerability. She worked with Josh to connect his on-court leadership to the lessons he learned off of it. Finn, no longer needing to be the saboteur, became our conscience. He'd listen to us practice and bluntly say, "That sounds fake," or "You're trying too hard there. Just say it like you mean it." His brutal honesty, once a source of conflict, was now an invaluable tool for keeping us grounded. The most surprising contributor was Mark. He didn't ask for a speaking part. He knew that wasn't his place. Instead, he offered a different kind of help. "You guys are talking about what happened," he said quietly during one session, "but the committee wasn't there. They need to see it. Feel it." He proposed creating a simple, powerful visual backdrop, not a slick PowerPoint, but a slideshow of raw, unedited photos from that time. A picture of me on that first, humiliating day. A shot of the girls' faces when the overalls were announced. A photo of the silent, intimidating wall of grays in the cafeteria. And finally, a candid shot of all of us, laughing at this very library table. He would run the tech, staying in the background, letting the images speak for him. It was his way of telling his part of the story without saying a word. Our final run-through was in the same empty auditorium where we had fallen apart. But this time, there was no spotlight, no pressure for perfection. We sat in a semicircle of chairs on the stage, as if we were just having a conversation. I spoke first, my voice still trembling slightly, but this time I didn't fight it. I spoke about the terror of that first day and the even greater terror of becoming a symbol. Josh followed, talking not about his stats, but about the choice to pass the ball. Finn performed a short, sharp poem about the comfort of anger and the difficulty of trust. Mark sat silently at the tech table, a quiet guardian of our shared history. And Maya spoke last. She didn't summarize or offer a tidy conclusion. She simply spoke about her own failures, her fear, her need for control, and the lessons she learned from the people beside her. She spoke about trust. As she finished, a quiet confidence settled over us. This presentation wasn't polished. It was raw, disjointed, and deeply personal. It was, in short, us. And for the first time, we all felt ready. The Crestwood University campus was beautiful and intimidating, a world of manicured lawns and ivy-covered brick buildings that seemed to whisper of history and prestige. We were led into a formal boardroom where the scholarship committee, a panel of 5 distinguished-looking professors and administrators, waited for us around a long, polished mahogany table. The room was quiet, serious, and felt a million miles away from the noisy, chaotic hallways of Northwood High. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. The old panic, the feeling of being an imposter, threatened to surface. I glanced at my friends. I saw the same flicker of anxiety in their eyes. For a terrifying moment, I thought we would all freeze. But then I saw Mark, already seated at the tech station in the corner, give us a small, steady nod. And I felt Maya's hand briefly squeeze mine under the table. We were not alone. I took a deep breath and began. "My name is Sam, and to be honest, I'm terrified to be here," I said, my voice shaking just enough to be real. "I'm not a hero. I'm not a leader. I'm just the guy who got so scared and so angry that he accidentally found his voice. And my story really begins with being ashamed of my own legs." The committee members, who had been shuffling papers with polite, academic smiles, all looked up. Their expressions shifted from polite interest to focused attention. This was not the start they had been expecting. From there, we unfolded our mosaic of truths. On the screen behind us, Mark projected the images raw, candid, and powerful. A photo of my face, pale with shock on the first day of the skirt rule, appeared as I spoke of humiliation. A sea of grim-faced girls in gray overalls filled the screen as Josh talked about the shift in the school's power dynamic. Josh spoke not of his basketball triumphs, but of the moment he chose to pass the ball in a losing game, and how that felt more like a victory than any trophy. Leadership, for me, he said, wasn't about making the winning shot. It was about trusting my teammate to take it. Finn didn't read his prepared poem. Instead, he just spoke from the heart, his voice raw. I thought trust was for suckers, he said, looking at Mark. I thought anger was the only honest thing. But it turns out, anger is easy. Trusting someone who hurt you, that's the hard part. That's the punk rock part. When it was Maya's turn, she didn't stand at a podium. She remained seated, one of us. She spoke of her own ambition, her fear of failure, and how her obsession with creating a perfect story had nearly destroyed the real one. Our legacy isn't a flawless narrative, she concluded, her voice clear and strong. It's a conversation. A messy, difficult, and ongoing conversation. The real legacy of Northwood isn't what we did, but what we learned to do together, to listen, to fail, to forgive, and to try again. As she finished, silence filled the grand, intimidating room. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a silence full of weight and emotion. We hadn't given them a presentation. We had given them a piece of ourselves. The head of the committee, a woman with kind, intelligent eyes, looked at each of us in turn. She took off her glasses, a slow smile spreading across her face. Well, she said, her voice filled with a warmth that melted the last of my anxiety. That was, without a doubt, the most honest and compelling presentation this committee has ever had the privilege of witnessing. 1 year later. The scene is not a formal auditorium, but a bright, airy classroom at Crossdressing University, filled with the nervous energy of first-year students. At the front of the room, Sam and Maya stand side by side, co-leading a freshman orientation workshop. The title on the projector screen behind them reads, Leadership and Empathy, a Dialogue. Sam is speaking, his voice calm and confident, gesturing easily as he shares an anecdote. Maya listens, a proud, loving smile on her face, ready to jump in not as a corrector, but as a partner. They move with an easy, practiced rhythm, a team in every sense of the word. They're not just telling the Northwood story, they are living its lessons. Crossfade to a sun-drenched basketball court in a community center. Josh, in a Crestwood Bulldog sweatshirt, is coaching a group of rowdy middle schoolers. He's not just running drills. He pulls a frustrated kid aside, crouching down to his level, talking to him not about his missed shot, but about his attitude. He's teaching them teamwork, respect, and resilience. He found a way to be both the athlete and the mentor, his leadership extending far beyond the university team he now plays for. Crossfade to a dimly lit, crowded coffee house. The air is buzzing with snaps and applause. On a small stage, Finn is performing, his voice a powerful, rhythmic torrent of words and passion. His poetry isn't just angry anymore, it's nuanced, questioning, and deeply empathetic. He's studying fine arts, and his work, a blend of visual art and spoken word, tackles complex social issues, challenging his audience to think, to feel, to engage. He found a way to keep his fire without burning everyone around him. Crossfade to a bustling student union building on the Crestwood campus. Mark is sitting at a large, round table, laughing easily with a diverse group of friends. They're arguing good-naturedly over a project. Finn walks up to the table, claps Mark on the shoulder, and grabs a chair. There's no awkwardness, no ghost of the past between them, just the simple, profound reality of a hard-won friendship. Mark is no longer an outcast. He has been forgiven, first by others, and finally, by himself. He has found his place. The final shot. We're back at Northwood High. A new school year has begun. Principal Croft stands before an auditorium filled with a new crop of freshmen. The stern, severe lines on her face have softened into a warm, knowing smile. She is telling them not about rules or discipline, but about the school's most important tradition, listening. As she speaks, the camera pans out, Moving through the hallways, we see a school that is vibrant, diverse, and alive with conversation. There are no uniforms, no factions, no wars. There is only the quiet, ongoing legacy of a group of kids who were forced into an impossible situation and emerged with the one thing that could truly change the world: a deep and abiding understanding of each other. The experiment was over, but the work had just begun. The morning after Josh's game, a fragile truce settled over our fractured group. The air was still tense, but the explosive anger had dissipated, leaving behind a residue of regret. It was Maya who took the first, difficult step. Armed with a new perspective from her conversation with Principal Croft, she sent a single text to me: Josh and Finn, library. 10 minutes. Please. When we gathered at our usual table, the silence was awkward. Maya didn't sit at the head of the table like a general. She sat with us as one of us. In front of her wasn't a laptop or a color-coded schedule. It was just a single, empty piece of paper. Before anyone else could speak, another figure appeared at the end of our table, hesitating. It was Mark Henderson. He looked nervous, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Finn was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Henderson?" he asked, though his voice lacked its usual bite. Finn told me you guys were meeting," Mark stammered, glancing at Finn, who gave a barely perceptible nod. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I know I can't change what I did, but I want to help. If you'll let me." The offer hung in the air, stunning the rest of us into silence. It was Maya who broke it, her voice soft but clear. She looked around the table, her gaze landing on each of us in turn, including Mark. "He's right to be here," she said. "Because I'm the one who needs to apologize." She took a deep breath. I was wrong. Completely. I got so obsessed with making everything perfect, with controlling the story, that I forgot what the story was even about. It was never about one person's vision. It was about all of us, finding our way through the mess together. She looked directly at me. "Sam, your strength is your honesty, and I tried to script it out of you." Then to Josh. "Josh, your passion is your own, and I tried to make you feel guilty for it." Then to Finn. "Finn, your fire is what kept us real, and I tried to put it out." She pushed the thick, bound copy of her original presentation into the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "This is a monument to my own fear," she said. "It's not who we are." Then, with a symbolic finality, she slid it off the table and into the recycling bin beside her. It disappeared with a soft rustle of paper. She pushed the single, blank sheet into the middle of the table. "This is us," she said. "A fresh start. No script. No agenda. Just our real stories, whatever they are. We'll build it together, or we won't build it at all." So, what do we really want to tell them? For the first time in weeks, the tension broke. A real conversation began. It was messy and awkward and real. Josh talked about his game, about leadership being more than just scoring points. Finn, prompted by Mark's presence, spoke about how easy it is to hate a stereotype, but how much harder it is to hate a person standing next to you. And I, finally feeling safe enough to be vulnerable, talked about the terror of being a symbol and the quiet relief of just being myself. Mark listened, a silent participant, his presence a quiet testament to the possibility of change. They weren't just planning a presentation anymore. They were remembering who they were.